Hi, this is Doug Goldstein from the Goldstein on Gelt Show. I was very excited when my producer told me that I was going to be interviewing Mitzi Perdue here on the Goldstein on Gelt Show. The Perdue name was actually very important where I grew up in the New York area because of her husband, Frank Perdue. But it turns out that Mitzi herself is unbelievable. She recently came out with a new book. She is a Harvard-educated speaker, teacher, and one of the things that she really is very passionate about is how families have to deal with money. Unfortunately, you see very, very famous families all the time in the news way too much. And she talks about that, but the lessons that she teaches apply to any family anywhere. If you are trying to develop a culture of money in your family that's going to raise really good kids, make sure you listen to this interview with Mitzi Perdue here on the Goldstein on Gelt Show. Okay, I'm very excited to have on the Goldstein on Gelt Show Mitzi Perdue. She's an author, a speaker, a businesswoman. She is also perhaps well known because her husband, Frank Perdue, was the man who said it takes a tough man to make a tender chicken, and I certainly knew his name, and I also thought he looked a lot like my uncle as I grew up in New York. Mitzi recently came out with a book. The book is called How to Make Your Family Business Last. The subtitle is Techniques, Advice, Checklists, and Resources for Keeping the Family Business in the Family. Now, Mitzi, I know what you really teach about a lot is not just about business, but it's really about developing a family culture to make sure that families are able to sustain themselves generation to generation as you have. Can you give us a little background on this?
I'd love to share it. My father, who was the co-founder of the Sheraton Hotels, and by the way, was in Tel Aviv for the opening of the Tel Aviv Sheraton.
Oh, fantastic.
The family business that was the forerunner of Sheraton was the Henderson Estate Company. We began in 1890, and we just celebrated our 127th reunion. The Perdue family is about to celebrate its 100th anniversary, and both families, their 7th generation and 5th generation. And this didn't come about by accident.
Interesting. So what is the secret sauce?
Aha. The secret sauce is, and I do believe this will apply to everybody who's listening to us, every family has a culture. But is it a culture that just came about by accident, or is it one that was designed? And both the Perdue family and the Henderson family put enormous effort into teaching kids from the youngest age values that will help you succeed as a family. Just to give you one of them is kids have to learn just from the youngest age an unselfish point of view of you can't always be right. You have to be willing to compromise. In both my families, we were taught how to resolve quarrels and how never to take a quarrel outside the family. The phrase in the Henderson family was, we don't wash our dirty linen in public.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got sort of a story about that if it would interest our listeners.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay, we were taught from the youngest age that taking a quarrel outside of the family, say to the press or to the lawyers, that would be just pretty much as wrong as committing murder. I mean, I expect never to commit murder. I also expect never to take a family quarrel outside of the family. And this was put to a real test when my father died in 1967, because half the family wanted to keep Sheraton, and we wanted to, and I was among those who wanted to. We wanted to do it because it was our identity. It was our father's legacy. Nobody would ever care as much about the employees as we would. So that was how half the family felt. But the other half, very reasonably, said there were business reasons that we really should sell the company because at that point, large hotel chains needed partnerships with other large groups in order to get infusions of cash for updating the hotels. Well, the feelings were just white hot on this because the people who held each view, I mean, they couldn't have felt more strongly. But we held true to our culture, which is Hendersons don't wash their dirty linen in public.
Mm-hmm.
We could argue in private, but when a decision was made, we closed ranks. I think the outside world had no idea about the absolute tempest that was going on within the family. And the reward for this was fantastic. We closed ranks. It was against the rules to hold a grudge. And that made possible that now, 50 years later, we're still a tight, warm, loving, supporting family.
That is amazing. We're talking with Mitzi Perdue. She recently came out with a book called How to Make Your Family Business Last. Certainly you have been successful in your family of keeping it last. Mitzi's been talking to us about this concept of culture and a family culture. How do you actually instill it? In other words, you're giving us a rule, which is you shouldn't quarrel outside the family, which to me sounds like a fantastic rule. But how do you actually teach kids? Is it you line them up and you say, here, kids, these are the secrets to success, and this is what we do? Or is there another model?
I wish it was as easy as that. No, in fact, I will stipulate that it's going to take time, effort, probably money, but it's a lot cheaper than the alternative, which is your family is having lawsuits against each other. The ways of instilling a culture in a family, there's a lot known about it because there's a lot of academic research on it. Plus, I can add to it a lifetime. I'm 76 and proud of it. I can add to that a lifetime of observing families where it works and where it doesn't work. And fortunately, both practical experience and academic research completely coincide. The first academic thing that I would love to share with everybody is the more you know your family stories, the higher functioning your family is. And by high functioning, I mean the kids stay in school, they don't get in trouble with the law, they don't do drugs, they don't have babies before they're adults.
Let's define that term. I want to know your family stories. What is that referring to?
Well, if you'll go to my website, I actually have a list of 19 questions that will determine whether you know your family stories or not. And it's a freebie, and I guess you will give my website later.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a woman whom I just admire so much. Her name is Robin Fivish, and she's from Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. And she spent 20 years figuring out what makes a family high-functioning and what's not. And the conclusion is knowing your family's stories. And the questionnaire where you can rate yourself is, do you know stories like how your parents met, what your parents studied in school, what their favorite sports were, just things that show that you know where you came from. Mm-hmm. And to my mind, the questionnaire, it's sort of a proxy for how much time you spend with your family and how much your family interacts.
Well, and that you're talking. It's not just a question of time. It's not a question of time in front of the TV. It's a question of actually having these conversations. It also sounds to me like people who are used to doing this, where talking is part of their culture, it'll help them in many areas, not the least of which is personal finance, because then when it comes time to talk about the budget or the spending or the shopping or the investing, people have tools to communicate. It's not like, oh my gosh, I don't even know how to talk to you.
That brings me to something that my father did. This was a busy man who had more than 100 hotels and 22,000 employees. But every Sunday, he would take an hour for what he called family hour. And for family hour, he'd tell us stories about his family. He'd inform us like how the stock market worked, what a bond was. Or if it interested him that week, he'd talk about the new telescope he had just bought and astronomy. But he spent time with his children. There were 5 of us. And, what a blessing that was for us. And then my mother had something similar, although it wasn't as formal and structured as what my father did. But she had what she called recipes for living. And these were endless little quotes, like, I'll share one of them that I'm really fond of. If you want to be happy, think what you can do for somebody else. If you want to be miserable, think what's owed to you.
That is great. That reminds me, I many years ago when my kids were little, I had actually seen a motorcycle accident. And I came home from work and I was quite disturbed. And I said, kids, I want to tell you, one of my secrets to success is don't ride a motorcycle. So one of the kids wrote it down on a piece of paper and we hung it up in the kitchen. And then every so often I would come up with another secret to success. Things like be nice, listen to other people. And then I would tell them the story of what happened to me that day. And we'd have a secret to success. And that list to this day, my kids are married in the Army and college already. It still is there. And when guests come over, they go, oh, wow, those are really good ideas. I like your mother's title too, Recipes for Living.
Well, I just love what you're doing because one of the secrets, I believe, to success as a family is traditions. Traditions are the lifeblood of an identity, and you gave your kids with those sayings. It helped with their identity. It will help them be high-functioning people. I love it.
That's fantastic. Hey, Mitzi, I know that you have a lot of great ideas. Unfortunately, we are just about out of time, but I'd like to tell everyone how they can find more about what you're doing, your website, your book. Tell us, what's the trick? How do we find you?
Okay, I would love to welcome any of you to my website. It's MitziPerdue.com, and Mitzi is M-I-T-Z-I, Perdue is P-E-R-D-U-E, and that's .com. And if you want to buy my book there, I'll autograph it to you, or you can get How to Make Your Family Business Last at Amazon.com.
Okay, so we will put links to all of that at the show notes of today's show at goldsteinongelt.com. Mitzi Perdue, thanks so much for joining us.
What a joy to be with you all.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Check out all of Doug's money ideas at goldsteinongelt.com. Doug specializes in helping people who live outside the United States handle their U.S. investment accounts. If you have a question that you would like answered on the air or off, contact Doug at his website or send him an email to doug@profile-financial.com.